where somebody said, I have a buyer, I have an offer. You talk to them and help them to see things a little differently.
I wish there was a week that went by that I didn't hear that at least 2 or 3 times. So my answer to that is I loved nothing more than to reach out to the owner of a company and say, I'd like to buy your business, and have them then sell to me, because I never once paid top dollar for that business, because one, they didn't truly know what their company was worth, and because I was buying companies, I did know. But it wasn't my job to tell them you're leaving money on the table.
Welcome to the Family Biz Show, where family business leaders become family legacy architects. Each week, we bring you bold conversations, practical tools, and generational insights to help you build a self-operating business, a coordinated family wealth plan, and a sustainable legacy that lasts. This is the Family Biz Show. Build the flywheel, protect the legacy.
Welcome, everybody, to the Family Biz Show. I am your host, Michael Palumbos, with Family Wealth and Legacy in Rochester, New York. Today, we have Cameron Bishop from Raincatcher joining us. Raincatcher is an M&A firm that specializes in that middle market. I would say the 10 to 100 million, $150 million businesses. And I asked Cam to join us today because I have seen this once or twice in my career, maybe a lot more than that, where, the multiples that they were expecting, the value, the sale price that people were expecting when they didn't have a next generation to transition to, didn't come through the way that they thought they would. So welcome, Cam. Really appreciate you being here today.
Michael, thanks. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So give us a little bit about your background and how did you get into this M&A world that you're in today, and tell us a little bit about Raincatcher.
Sure. Well, thanks for asking. I have a bit of an unusual career path. I went to the University of Missouri School of Journalism and started my career as an advertising copywriter, and grew up in a technical magazine publishing company, small business, 90 employees, $7 million. The first 6 years I was there, we grew it to about 15 million. And then we were sold off by the owners, and the buyers was Macmillan Publishing, a Fortune 100. And they said, hey, we like this business. We want you to grow. Go buy companies. And we had no idea how to do it. We just went out and did it. And the very first deal, for better or worse, was one that I led. And I screwed it up badly. And you often get a PhD from your mistakes. It's often the best way to learn. It's also a survival skill. You don't want to make those mistakes too many times. And things worked out over my career there. There are 23 years, grew the company from when I started at 7 million. When I left as the CEO, we were doing 400 million top line and about 100 million in EBITDA profits. And we had done roughly 35 or 40 acquisitions, both purchased and successfully integrated. And that's a key part of that process. I wrote a business plan. I landed a partnership with JP Morgan Chase Bank, an equity group, and we built another company for my kitchen table, averaged roll up over about 3.5 years, 0 to about 120 million. The first 400 million company, we had a little over 2,000 employees, 23 U.S. cities, 5 foreign countries. The second company, we had about 500 employees in about 7 U.S. cities. And I did that for about 5 years. I did a very troubled turnaround for Hallmark Cards in New York for a year. And for your audience, I spent 5 years as a partner in a boutique consulting firm doing what's referred to as exit and transition planning, helping business owners groom, prepare, and plan for an eventual exit. Then I was recruited away. I spent 3 years doing a very complex turnaround and technology transformation on a $60 million 501c3 business. My contract ended during COVID. I got very bored. I don't sit well. I get bored. I said, well, I want to do something different. What do I like to do? I like buying and selling companies. I'd acquired 50 of them and spent over $500 million doing so. So I went out and did a search. I found Raincatcher, my current firm, where I am a partner and a managing director. And as you mentioned, Michael, we're what's referred to as a lower middle market investment bank. So we are a true investment bank. We meet all of the FINRA compliance requirements under the SEC, and we represent privately owned and family owned business owners at the time they want to sell. And that's a growing market because most of these owners don't have children who want to come into their business anymore, and they're left with only one option, and that's to outright sell.
Yeah, I love listening to the family businesses where, the next generation is all excited to come into the business. They were with mom or dad or grandma and grandpa in the warehouse, or out in the fields, or whatever the case may be. But that's a shrinking number today. The amount of different career choices and paths that we have has just grown exponentially. And there's a very big growing number of family businesses that might be first, second, third, fourth, even fifth generation, and there's nobody to pass it to, and there's nobody to transition it to. And so, having this conversation right now about, how do I get ready for this? How do I avoid being taken advantage of? How do I, most of the businesses, not most, almost all of the businesses that we meet, they've grown and flourished in one business. They've never sold one before. And very often, this rugged, individualistic, attitude that we have as Americans says, oh, I can do this too. I'm supposed to be able to do it all. And, I have pushed the business owners and the families that I serve that, to find somebody like yourself, interview, several people, find one that like, and trust to help you to do this process, because you're only going to get to do it once.
Well, that is so true, Michael. I think the common statistic is that 10,000 baby boomers turn age 65 every day, and they own a substantial number of the privately held or family-owned companies in this country. And as you mentioned, and as we see all the time, when they call us and say, hey, I want to sell my company, our first question is always why. We get a variety of answers changed over the years, and I'll come back to that. But one of the top answers is they don't have children who want to move into the company. And they're left with no other option than to sell the business. It's their primary source of future wealth. And in most cases, they view it as generational wealth to, take care of family members, children, etc., as part of that process. But one of the single biggest mistakes that we see these owners make, and it's very human nature, is they don't understand that there is a difference, a very big difference between running a company on a day-to-day basis and running a company for value creation. And to affect value creation, they have to understand that you can't spend 95% of your time working in the business and only 5% of your time working on the business. And you also can't simply wake up one morning because you're frustrated, something went wrong, another employee quit, new competitor, whatever it might be, and say, that's it, I'm done, I'm going to sell today. And we see that so often. And that is a prescription for either making a company unsellable or creating a scenario where it's going to sell at a much lower value than it might otherwise sell if it was properly groomed and prepared for an exit process.
So when you're talking about properly groomed and prepared, let's just dive right into that one. And one of the things, that I think you'll agree with is I tell the families that we serve who are planning on transitioning the business to the next generation, and they're hoping for this, long-term legacy business, which is great. It's wonderful to think that way. But we tell them, why wouldn't you build this business? Why wouldn't you do all the things that you would do as if you were preparing it to sell it? Because that's how you're going to have the most value out of it. And I liken this philosophy, and if this is a story that you use, I apologize, but I liken this to thinking about, when we sell our house. And I remember going through this, and, you go in and you get rid of the junk and you paint it and you put the new cabinets in and you clean everything up and you put the new carpets in. And then when you get done doing all that, right before you put it on the market, you're sitting there going, this place ain't so bad. And so, I think it's important that why wouldn't we always be looking to prepare our home, prepare our business for a sale so that this place isn't so bad all the time, every day? What are some of the keys to when you meet an owner for the first time, they raise their hand, Cam, come on in. We're ready to do this. and you're like, whoa, you are not ready. What are the typical things that you're finding that you walk an owner through to help them start to prepare both mentally, around, what do I need to change my thinking around and around the business? What are some of the top things that you're looking for and helping them with?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if they're going to be selling, obviously they are profitable businesses, and because I'd say 98% of the owners that come to us have no experience buying or selling companies. Their company grew organically, and that might have been just good luck, right time, right place, or maybe they're in a hot market, certainly some talent. But I think it's a natural assumption that if your company's profitable, you're going to sell it for a lot of money. And they focus again on that, focus on working in the business rather than on it. The majority of these businesses are pass-through legal entities. They're LLCs or S corps. And reinvestment in the company means that they're taking home a smaller distribution at the end of the year, because reinvesting requires a good chunk of that cash. And those factors alone, so they're focused on generating revenue on the top line, profit on the bottom line, and minimizing or limiting taxes as much as possible. And those are sometimes counter to the best actions they can take to manage the business for ultimate exit and value creation. Let's take the simplest example. These business owners don't understand, and this is a case very often. So one of the biggest barriers we see is what is called owner dependency. Doesn't matter if it's first generation, second generation, third generation. Very, very often, that business owner is a key source of institutional or technical or specific knowledge that is mandatory for the business to continue. Secondly, they are quite often the key point of contact with customers. I was on a call a week ago with a business owner, and this guy he's got a very cool business, very simple. He's minting money, doesn't work all that much. He works, but not all that much. And one of our questions always is, when we're doing our due diligence as a potential investment banker to represent them, is, so do your customers call your 1-800 number? Because he does have a biz development guy, and he just proudly says, "Oh no, they call my cell phone." And that is a major red flag. So the irony of business companies that want to buy a business is they're open to risk because they're out trying to buy a business. But at the same time, they are also extremely risk averse. And owner dependency is one of those key factors. And the second to that is, if they don't have any kind of successor in the company, then, and the irony is, when they want to sell and they call us, they do so because they want to retire in some reasonably short period of time. But if they have significant importance to the business's ongoing success and they don't have a viable successor, the buyers either won't buy the business, they will create a very unattractive deal structure to mitigate the risk, or they'll reduce what they're willing to pay, or a combination of those. And to add insult to injury, they ask that business owner to stay on for some period of time, usually in some form of a management contract. And if the buyer of your business is a financial buyer, like private equity, they love nothing better than have you stay on for at least 3 years, if not 5 years, and roll over part of the proceeds of the sale as equity in their new part of the investment. So that's kind of barrier number one in this process. And again, if they hire a successor, that's money that's coming out of their pocket in the form of distribution, but it can pay a return 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes more on exit if the buyer doesn't see risk and they can see a succession plan.
Yeah. And when we're coaching business owners in that arena, we call it the number one thing you want to do is build a self-operating business. And we utilize a framework called metronomics. Doesn't matter the name, whether you're EOS or scaling up or some other business operating system. We like the idea around metronomics because it talks about teaching CEO plus leadership team. And the idea is that the CEO's job is strategy and culture and working, on the business. but not working in the business. The leadership team and getting everybody in sync, it's their job to make sure that if the CEO was away for 3, 4, 6 months, that the business would be in better shape when the CEO came back, than when he or she left. And then that, in order to do that, and this is going to be stuff right up your alley. We need a player leadership team. We need that culture of accountability, and we need the CEO doing what the CEO is supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, we don't have a sophisticated system like you have, but we have a simple litmus test. If a business owner, when we're on this initial conversation, says, "Oh, I haven't taken a vacation in 2 years," that's another red flag. If I have a business owner who says, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm late getting back to you on this," and this is true. I have a client right now says, "I was just over in Africa on a big game hunting trip for 3 weeks." That's one I like to hear, because that means a business can successfully perpetuate itself and continue without a 24/7, 365 presence of that owner. And in this particular case, the owner's wife also plays a critical role. And about the time he got back from Africa, she left for England to go to a Coldplay concert. And again, that's a well-structured, well-run business in that case.
So owner dependence is one of the first things that we've got to be looking at when we're thinking about selling. If you're listening to this right now, I just want to make sure that we understand it, that, being the person that all the phone calls come to, being the person that, it becomes the bottleneck for the business, not being able to take a 2 or a 3-month vacation, those are not badges of honor. Those are things that are going to be detrimental if and when you decide, I don't have a successor, I need to put this stuff together. And for those who keep putting off this idea, if you don't have a successor right now and you keep putting this off saying, "Oh, I'm going to be okay, everything will be fine," it's one health event away from a fire sale. And that's what we want to avoid, and that's why we wanted to do this podcast. So if owner dependence is the big one that you see, Cam, what's the second one?
Well, actually, owner dependence is most of the time number 2. Number 1 is horrible or incomplete or inaccurate accounting. And that kills more potential deals than anything. And it's all those things together. Accounting and owner dependency are really critical reasons why a business owner should begin to think about their exit timing, ideally 5 years before, but readily 3 years at best. Give us at least a year if you want us to take you to market. We see, the accounting stories, a simple accounting story. Business owner called us, wanted to sell. We said, why? They said, "Hey, look, the husband was a brilliant engineer, had 7 patents. The wife had kind of come into the business and sort of took over all of the administrative stuff, not something she'd originally wanted to do. And they were just trying to run the company. They wanted to work in it. They didn't want to own it. They knew it could grow if it had a bigger player who could come in and better capitalize it." And I said, "Okay, tell me a little bit about the size of the company." In this case, it was about a $7 million business. Okay, are you profitable? Because I can't tell you how many business owners can't even tell me the answer to that question. In this case, it said, "Yeah, we're doing about 1.5 million in profits." So we said, okay. They sent their financials in to us as part of our process after we signed an NDA for them. One of my partners is a licensed CPA, spent 15 years in the audit practice with KPMG. And so he goes through the financials with a fine-tooth comb. It comes back, sure enough, they were totally mismanaging reporting on anything related to raw materials for their manufacturing process, inventory work in process, and they were using advanced deposits essentially as their free cash flow. Well, bottom line, that company not only wasn't making 1.5 million, but they were break even. And we see that's a pretty dramatic version, but we see these stories all the time where they think they're making one amount of money and they're not. And it takes a long time to get accounting cleaned up. Most of them are on a cash basis, but buyers of businesses all take on debt when they buy a business. And the banks that supply that debt want to see the financials of the company being acquired reported on a GAAP accrual accounting basis. And it takes a long time to convert from cash to GAAP to get the timing right between recognition of revenue and the correlating expenses assigned to that revenue. So those are the two biggest barriers we see to sellability, or sometimes they may have to wait another year or 2 years while they get their accounting cleaned up and consistent before they can ever go to market.
Yeah, before the show started, you and I were chatting about, some of the stories that I've run into, you've run into, and that was probably both of those things in one of the families that I worked with. They were ready to sell. The family there wasn't a successor. They didn't want to pass it on. They knew up and down, who the 10 different people that could purchase their business, because it was a unique, business, of course. And the two things that happened was, number one was that the CEO was the bottleneck and made most of the decisions, did most of the, the things went through that person. And then two, the financials were family business financials. They were good enough for the family to get through tax season. They were good enough for, the things that they need to do. But when the buyer asked for financials that were clean, they weren't. They were not even close to ready. And I had warned them and cautioned them that you're not ready to go to market. You need a business broker to help you, stage the business, just like you would stage a house. You don't know what buyers are looking for because you've never done this before. And this is not stuff that's available sitting on the internet that lets you know the difference between clean financials and non-clean financials, because you've been running this business for 10, 20, 40, 70 years, and now you're going to the market with it. And it might have been a great lifestyle. You might have not ever been audited by the IRS and everything looks and feels good, and you had great cash flow all those years, but that doesn't mean that you're ready to sell.
Exactly. And a good investment banking or broker professional truly does help you stage the business from an accounting standpoint. Because, for example, what we will do is we will go through all the financials. We ask for the last 3 years of monthly income statements and balance sheets, and we go through those with a fine-tooth comb. And it's very standard and not alarming, unless they're egregiously so, for business owners to sort of apply some personal expenses in one form or another to the business. Not uncommon at all. We see that, we call that EOB for excess owner benefit. Helps mitigate taxes. There's some additional advantages to it, obviously, from a lifestyle standpoint, or, a leased family car, whatever the case might be. But we go back through that and we identify all of those and create what's called an adjusted EBITDA profit schedule to optimize those profits and add back those personal expenses. The challenge we see is, because the accounting is often poor, is they can't document whether or not those were truly personal expenses that the buyer of the business would not occur. Therefore, they get stuck in the business. In certain industries, we see situations where the owners will take cash payments. The payments themselves are legitimate for services rendered. The problem is they don't recognize them on the books, but when it comes time to sell, they want credit for it as part of the revenue and adjusted EBITDA, and it just doesn't happen. We won't do it. We wouldn't take the representation if somebody was insistent on that, and buyers aren't going to pay for it because there's no documentation for it. So those are just some of the classic accounting mistakes that we see. Another simple one is, if a business requires a lot of capital spending, like for equipment or machines, what have you, and if they're expensing those rather than taking those to the balance sheet, then they're artificially hurting their profitability in that particular case. So we try to identify all those as a true part of the staging process.
Love it. You mentioned, and I've said business broker, investment banker. You know what? If you could help us and the audience understand what is the difference between a business broker and an investment banker, and and where's Raincatcher, in the middle of that stuff.
Yeah. So I'll have to make this a little bit of a generalization, because there are always exceptions. But in general, the majority of business brokers represent the owners of smaller companies. Let's say below $1 million in EBITDA profits. I emphasize again, there are always exceptions, but they tend to work more with what are referred to as Main Street businesses, restaurants, bars, dry cleaners, smaller entities. Investment bankers, there are two levels. So we are a lower middle market firm, and our clients generally have between 2 million and 10 million in EBITDA profits. We do handle some much larger companies. We've got a $90 million top line client right now, but that is an underserved market because the big investment banks like Goldman Sachs, for example, those firms won't touch a business with anything below 5 million in EBITDA profits. Some are not below 10, some are 50 million. So that market in between is heavily underserved, and that's where the majority by volume of businesses are in terms of their financial performance. And they've been a woefully underserved part of the market. So what we did, we identified that space and we brought the big bank tactics and techniques downstream. Two of my partners came from big banks. We're 5 of us partners. One was a major commercial real estate professional. As I mentioned, I'm unusual. I came from the buy side of the business, doing $500 million in deals. But so we apply those skills, but more so, we are affiliated with what's referred to as a FINRA registered broker dealer. So if you have a wealth manager or a stockbroker, they have to go through all the compliance requirements and testing to become a registered rep under FINRA, which is sort of under the umbrella of the Securities and Exchange Commission. So we go through all that testing, we do annual compliance, but it also allows us to legally represent business owners to sell their companies in all 50 states. And many brokers are only licensed in 1 or 2 or 3 or a small number of states. And they actually, in many cases, only need a residential real estate license in order to be qualified to sell companies.
Yeah. And that is a big difference. Talk about, why having that national footprint is such a big advantage for a lot of these companies. I understand if you're a $1 million business, a $3 million business with, $300,000 of EBITDA, or, those kinds of things, you're probably going to be better off with a business broker. But you start running a $20 million business with, over $1 million of EBITDA. Tell me why that national footprint is so important.
Yeah, it sure is. You want the largest buyer pool that you can bring into a process. For example, when we're representing the owner of a company, we go out and we research to find relevant private equity firms, family offices, what are referred to as independent sponsors, and strategic companies. And those companies are spread out all across the country. And we market all of those initially using email and an anonymous teaser email. Then we follow up with outbound phone calls. And if someone sees our listing and they contact us, we have them sign an NDA and we do a video call, just like we're doing here. And we fully vet those buyers, because when we're assessing a potential of a buyer to buy our client, we look at this not only from the technical standpoint as an investment banker, but we jokingly say that we are 50% investment banker and 50% match.com. Because I haven't met a client yet, especially if they're second or third generation family business, who wasn't extremely concerned and focused on the type of buyer that was going to own their business. And if we don't see a fit there, price isn't going to overcome that in any of the cases we've seen. So we're going to assess over time the total price somebody's going to offer, the deal terms they're going to offer, the deal structure they're going to offer, and that buyer fit. And that's why we go through that sort of vetting process with these potential buyers of the business. So you want as big a pool as possible. We may go out, depending on the type of business and how specialized, we could go out to 300 to 500 potential buyers for that business, versus a localized or a regional market. You're just not going to have the same buyer pool.
Yeah. Have you ever had a situation where somebody said, I have a buyer, I have an offer, I have an offer right now. I don't need you guys, but thanks for calling on us. We're all good. And then you talk to them and help them to maybe see things a little differently. And maybe there was a different outcome than they were expecting. I don't know if that's a scenario that's familiar to you or not.
I wish there was a week that went by that I didn't hear that at least 2 or 3 times. So my answer to that is, again, remember, I spent 35 years on the buy side. I was buying companies like theirs. I did what are called leverage roll-ups in the media industry. The $400 million company was backed by one of the largest private equity firms in the world, Colbert Kravis Roberts. And I loved nothing more than to reach out to the owner of a company and say, I'd like to buy your business, and have them then sell to me, because I never once paid top dollar for that business, because one, they didn't truly know what their company was worth. And because I was buying companies, I did know. But it wasn't my job to tell them you're leaving money on the table. And that's one of the events. When we're representing an owner, we can bring multiple buyers into the process with indication of interest letters, then later letters of intent. The market's going to set the price on any business. Yeah. But until you've got competitive sample of bids, you're not going to know what the market price is going to be. And we can then, what we politely call, create deal tension. And through a combination of whether it's overall enterprise value or elements of the deal structure, we are extremely successful in leveraging portions of that offer above where it originally came in. And when these owners say, hey, I got a buyer for my business, my other answer is, I can almost guarantee you that 100% of the time, if there's one buyer interested in your company, there are a lot more.
Yeah. And that's the key, is that competitive bidding needs to happen. And the housing market, I think this is a really good conversation of bringing the houses in, because that's what we're used to. And we just had a period of time over the last, 2, 3, 4, 5 years where it became a seller's market. And you'd put your house up, and let's just say it was a real simple house, $250,000 house. And all of a sudden, that $250,000 house is being bought for $325,000 above your asking price, because it was such a competitive market. Today, right now, I think, talking to a few realtors out there, it's still competitive, and it might go above. It's probably not going to go $75,000 over for that. That same house now is probably $275,000 or maybe $300,000. Well, you do that every single day, every week in this business competitive bidding. I'll share a story with everybody, and if you've heard this before, folks, I apologize, but it's just worth reiterating, where an owner had a value for the business of $30 million in one hand that his accounting firm had put together for him. They had a buyer that was a strategic buyer, good, they were friendly competitors with an agreement that, not just, nothing written, all good, for $30 million. And he was ecstatic. In walks the investment banker. Don't you sign anything? Don't you do anything? Do you not understand? Just like you said, if there's one, there's 10. If there's 10, there's 30. And so this competitive bidding, really needs to fit. And the guy's like, yeah, but this is a company that's going to be a great fit and everything. Please just trust me. Started to work with the investment banker, trusted the investment banker to take him to market. And that same business, after going through the process of the competitive bidding, was bought by the same company that had the $30 million offer for $76 million. And so there's nothing wrong with it going to that company, and that's a great fit and everything. But that company, just to what you said earlier, Cameron, is that you knew it wasn't their job to tell them that they were leaving money on the table. It was their job to buy the business for the best price they can.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other story we hear quite frequently when somebody calls us about wanting to sell, and we have access, if you're looking at residential, you go to Zillow or MLS and you can get prices for houses in the area. Because we represent so many business owners, we know the general valuation ranges that companies are selling for, and we have access to databases in the business industry for valuations. And we hear these owners say, hey, there's a guy he owned a company in my same industry down the road, and he sold for $1 gazillion. Well, you hear those all the time, but you don't know what was involved in that. So maybe the guy sold the real estate along with the business. Biggest thing that we see where owners make mistakes in a transaction process, especially if they want to represent themselves, is that I've never met a business owner yet who understood what is referred to as net working capital. And, if they could pay you $20 million for your business, but if your inventory levels are running at unusually high rates, and they say, I'm going to get all the inventory, the owner doesn't realize he just discounted that price over what it could have been. He may have debt on the business. The buyer's not going to pay for that debt. He may have a huge amount of receivables. More so if they got a lot of cash on the balance sheet, buyers will try to keep that cash. That's a big discount. So that says $20 million on the piece of paper, but the net effect of what he received could be substantially less. The inverse is that is the case. A simple example, we had a recent client, husband and wife owned business. Our research said that business was probably going to sell between $7 million and $8.2 million. We did our usual marketing program. We were fortunate enough to get an outlier bid at $10.5 million. We had a small private equity firm interested in the business that started out at $6 million. We negotiated with them. We worked their ultimate price up, and they were, by the way, a very attractive fit for our client, a great fit. We worked them up to $11.5 million. We structured a networking capital formula that netted the sellers an additional $1.5 million. So what could have been a $7 to $8 million deal was effectively a $13 million deal for this family. Now, that's not always the case, but it is indicative of what opportunities can be there. When I was running companies, my theory always was know what you know how to do well and do it, know what you don't know how to do well and hire an expert for you. And I haven't met a business owner yet who actually was effective at this whole transaction process.
That's a really, really good analogy and good lesson for all of us. And I think that applies to my version of that is pay the man. My wife is like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know how to fix the car. I don't know how to put the cabinets in. I mean, could I learn to do it? Of course, I'm a pretty resourceful person, but at the end of the day, you want to put up a retaining wall in front of the house for the garden. You just get the team in here, let them take care of it, get him or her in here, and everybody be happier. Because if you have me doing it, you're gonna hate. It's gonna take the whole summer. It's not gonna be fun. It's not good for anybody. Just pay the person.
Exactly.
And that's the same here. And realistically, go back to that business that I said in the beginning where, they could have sold for, $33 million. They ended up selling for $27 million. That, the fee for the investment banker wasn't going to be $6 million on a $33 million deal. And so, but the give up was a lot more than had they brought an expert in to help them package everything right and get them ready for sale.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I would add that we don't all, obviously to an extent it's a commercial for us investment bankers generally, and hope for us at Raincatcher specifically, but we are also extremely ardent proponents of having sell-side business owners be represented by a time-tested, proven attorney, as opposed to, kind of the family business lawyer or their trust and estates planning. I had an entire deal blow up because my client insisted on being represented by, and I kid you not, family law divorce attorney. And it ultimately blew the deal up, because this lawyer had no idea about the complexities around deal terms, basket caps, escrows, all of the standard language and techniques and tactics used in contract law around deals. I believe that we pay for ourselves as investment bankers, and I think I've never seen one of these lawyers essentially not pay for themselves. The same if they have to bring in tax experts. So we will surround our clients and play quarterback to make sure that they are protected and represented throughout this process, because the tax factor, that's essentially part of the net effective purchase price on the deal. If the legal terms aren't structured properly, and it exposes the seller to taxes they might otherwise not have to pay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm glad that you brought that up because it's so true. It's just like you don't want your person who does your property deeds for your real estate that's never written a will to do your will. Law is one of those things where, especially when you start to get above certain levels of wealth and certain levels of success, you must be working with specialists in their field to be able to do, what you're talking about. And just a general business attorney is different than that M&A attorney.
Very, very well, in almost all cases. Some of them do.
Absolutely.
Some of them M&A, unless they've got a good, CV in M&A deals, it can make a lot of difference.
Awesome. Is there anything else? So, we talked about some of the other things to look out for. The financials need to get cleaned up. We need to make sure that we're, owner independence is the key that we want, not owner dependence. Bringing in an investment banker to help you with the deal and to structure things and to get you ready, making sure that you've got an M&A attorney and good financial help, on your team from the accounting side. What else is out there that, kind of your bugaboos?
Yeah, there are two other kind of core criteria and then a couple of financial factors. So core criteria, number one, is what we call customer dependency. If the litmus test is if more than 20% of a business's revenue comes from a single client, that will automatically eliminate a lot of potential buyers at the family office or private equity level. And if, as I understand the profile of a lot of your readers, that's the key buyer pool for a lot of the companies owned by your listeners. When we're doing these vetting calls with these potential buyers, the first question they ask us is, why is the owner selling? How long is he willing to stay? What's their customer dependency? And by that third one, I've had people say, sorry, we're out. They all have investment theses, and that is one of the core measurements that they use. A little more subtle is vendor dependency. I had a client that had a brilliant business. He was printing money. Super cool. Not much competition, but it was dependent on a unique kind of core material, and he only had one source for that material. He'd been working with him for decades, but he didn't have any contract in place. And buyers said, if we lose this, we don't have a business. So that's a key factor. Then tied in with the accounting is they must pay attention to their gross profit margins. Every industry has kind of a standard average gross profit margin. Maybe it's distribution, maybe it's 30%, for example. Buyers of businesses in those unique sectors know what the average gross profit margins are. That's again revenue minus the cost of raw materials or cost of goods yields gross profit and gross profit percentage. And if they're well below that, it's at least a yellow flag. If they're at it, then it's sort of net neutral. If they're better than the average, then obviously that's a positive factor. Then lastly is kind of a no-brainer. They want to look at businesses that are growing, not stagnant, and not in decline. And owners should know what their future pipeline of business looks like and make sure that they are sustaining that business through a transaction process. A process takes, in this day and age, from signing an engagement letter to start a process, it's a 9 to 10 month process. And we've had several of our clients who are doing well into the process, then their revenues and or profits or both began to decline, and it's either going to cause the deal to not get done, the deal terms change substantially, or buyers are going to offer less money for the business.
That's a real big one. And I'm glad that you brought that up because, what I tell owners is if you're going through this process, this is what what your job is as the investment banker, the business broker's job is to help you be there so that you can put your blinders on and stay focused on sales and make sure that top line revenue and the profits are staying in place. Otherwise, that deal could go south on you.
That's right. And I'd say also, owners do not understand how incredibly taxing and stressful selling their company is. For almost everybody, this is their baby. They eat, sleep, and breathe it. It may be the only thing they've done for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So even though they want to sell and they know why they want to sell, it's an emotional challenge. and there's a ton of work. They need to understand that it's a full-time job on top of a full-time job. And we often in our world as investment bankers, and I'll say, by the way, for me, it's actually the most rewarding part of the job. And that is helping this emotional roller coaster ride for our clients and to give them context, because they're dealing with a lot of foreign, sometimes intimidating concepts and issues and legal terms that can scare them to death. And there's days when I've taken 10 phone calls from my client to say, what is up with this? How's this going to go? Well, I want a management contract. How am I going to do that? And that's a big role we play. And sometimes it's literally to keep them from becoming their own worst enemy and blowing the deal up, which is not going to be in their best interest. So it's an unsung part of the job, but it's a really satisfying part of the job for us as investment bankers.
One of the things, as you're talking about that, it just brought that picture I've shared with people that are getting ready to sell. In the beginning of the process, the seller is fully in control and all the things are in their favor. But the moment that they get that letter, the moment that, that we switch and the buyer now is in control, because they're the ones that are asking for documents. They're the ones that are asking the questions. And all of a sudden, the seller's going to be in this spot of feeling out of control, not understanding, like you said, not understanding the language, not understanding the process and putting those pieces together. And you earn your keep as investment bankers, walking people through that process and helping them to understand it. So it's not just on the preparing for sale and getting that package together and that book, and the letters of intent and getting the NDA signed and people looking at it. But it's the other side of that where what's happening when the buyer is asking for this. Whether that buyer is playing nice or really trying to get a rise out of your seller to get an emotional reaction. And that's the investment banker's job to be able to help them with that. So that is an unsung part of all this. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And they don't understand that you might take 6 months to get you through a letter of intent, but then the buyer is going to ask for and almost always get 90 days of exclusivity to do their buy-side due diligence, quality of earning audits, deliver drafts of the contract. And a really good investment banker is literally going to be hand in glove with them through that entire process. So in our case, we'll help refer attorneys and tax experts, but we are on every call with our client and those lawyers and the buyers when necessary. And if the buyer wants to go meet with our client, we never leave our client alone with a buyer. We are always on site with them to make sure that nothing unusual happens, let's say, and that we continue to control that process. So we are there until the wire transfer hits that client's bank account.
That's awesome. Cameron, is there anything else that that we missed? Is there anything I didn't ask or that we didn't talk about that you wish, that you want our listeners to understand?
Yeah, well, I think one last thing that's really important on a personal level for these people, it's nothing that we as bankers have anything to do with, but that is most business owners, an insult, it's just a fact, don't have much life outside of their business because they eat, sleep, and breathe it. It's 24/7, 365. So it's often their primary source of socialization, ego validation. It's their life, and they don't have a lot of hobbies. And this is true of male business owners and female. I've actually, one of the worst cases I saw was a female business owner, because I always think about guys never really have friends. Well, if you run a company, it's true, it's loading at the top. But please think about what your life looks like the day after you sell, because we see so many owners emotionally crash and burn because their company was their reason for being. It was their purpose in life, and suddenly they've lost that purpose and they don't really have hobbies. They may play golf, but it's tough to play golf 7 days a week, especially if you're in some place like Kansas City. And they go through a really difficult period, and they may have a ton of money in the bank, but a really interesting phenomenon occurs. They became successful and got all this money because they were willing to take calculated risk. Once they have that money in the bank, they become completely risk averse. Could they go out and start a new company? And you just don't see it. So I always say, please think about what's your life plan look like post exiting a business.
So if you just are listening to this right now and you heard Cam say that, and that, made the hair on the back of your neck rise up a little bit, or you got a little bit of, ooh, that's me, make sure you connect with us, because remember, Family Wealth and Legacy has a program called From Success to Significance, and it has nothing to do with anything other than what you just talked about, Cam. And that's just to help people think about what was my life? How did I get here? And now what do I want to do in my next act? So that we want to make sure, that success to significance is all about, how do I retire to something, not from something? I want to be excited about what my next chapter looks like, and whether it's, something important that I'm doing with my grandkids, or it's, something I'm doing in the community to give back to the community that, that took care of me, or economic development, or whatever it may be for you, or hobbies. It's all fine. There is no right or wrong, but sometimes it takes a discovery process to help you get there. So we do have a program that does that. And you had no idea. So I'm saying, Cam, I don't think I've talked about it on the show too much, but that program, I've taken several CEOs through it, and they're just like, this was really helpful. I don't think I would have done this if I didn't know that, if you didn't poke me, Michael, to walk me through this. But I'm really glad that now, as I'm getting ready for what's next, I've got some ideas that I wouldn't have thought about before.
Yeah. I could tell a lot of horror stories there. The point has clearly been made.
Awesome. Well, Cameron Bishop, I want to say thank you so much. Raincatcher.com is where you can connect with Cam. You're probably available on LinkedIn as well.
Yep. Under Cameron Bishop, find me easily on LinkedIn, or email cameron.bishop@raincatcher.com. If you've got that one customer who wants to buy your company, just call me. No harm, no foul, no sales pitch. Just make sure you're safe.
Yeah. I really, really, really appreciate the time and the advice that you shared with us today. Again, folks, I'm Michael Palumbos with Family Wealth and Legacy in Rochester, New York. You've been listening to the Family Biz Show, and Cameron Bishop with Raincatcher.com. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we look forward to sharing some more incredible information with you on the next episode of the Family Biz Show. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on the Family Biz Show. Until next time, build the flywheel, protect the legacy.